Working with the phases of the moon is one of the most centering practices that you can incorporate into your daily life, your rhythm of being and moving through this lifetime. It is a practice that folks have followed forever. It used to be how time was tracked, the moon phases, because the moon would obviously shift through the phases over a very predictable time period. So you could always tell like where you were in this moon cycle. We look at the word month and Monday, all with that a, a linguistic connection to the word moon, all connected together there. And the medicine of the moon really lies in the rhythm and its rhythm in the phases and what we're reminded of by the phases of the moon and the lunar cycle. And that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the podcast. If the word witch makes you feel full of power and excitement, if you love personal development but loathe boring love and light conversation, if a sexy combo of witchery and inner work piques your interest, you're in the right place. Welcome home, Magic Maker, and welcome to Expedition to Soul, the podcast brought to you by the Sisters Enchanted. Welcome back for another episode of Expedition to Soul. I hope you're having a great day. It's almost the spring equinox, almost the first day of spring. So if you live somewhere where you notice the seasons and it's been cold and it's been snowy, I guess depending where you are, could still be very cold and snowy. But where I am, it's definitely starting to speak of spring. It gets very cloudy here in the winter and the clouds are parting. What's that line in Frozen where the little sister Anna says, "The sky's awake, so I'm awake"? That is the energy that I feel when the days are longer again, and it just feels like I can open the windows or I can just run outside and I don't have to think about a base layer and snow pants and wool socks and all the things. Just get out there and seize the day. Anyway, we're almost there. We're almost at Ostara, almost at that equinox. All right. The moon. Let's chat about the moon. The moon it's something that there's a lot of talk about with the new moons and the full moons. And, I feel like that makes sense because they are easy markers in the cycle, in the lunar cycle. So the lunar cycle lasts 28 to 30 days. It kind of varies in there. And also, depending where you are on Earth, it can vary a little bit, specifically time zones and whatnot, how it's actually measured. And astrological versus astronomical is a little bit different too. Obviously, we're in the world of metaphysics and nature spirituality. So we're always looking at that astrological standpoint, the astrology around it. But with the new moon marks the fresh lunar cycle. And then the full moon is halfway through a lunar cycle. So those are really the key indicators. What people pay a lot of attention to is the full moon, though. And there's a lot of sentiment in the rise of feminine spirituality. And you might see this, you might have heard it, you might have read books about it, but the rise of like the divine feminine and the goddess and whatnot. And I have so many thoughts on that topic. That's not what we're here for today, but I have a lot of thoughts on new age, rise of the feminine, divine feminine, masculine. I have so many thoughts on it and I just have not put them into words yet. So I'm still kind of thinking of how I want to swing that or like put that conversation together because my thoughts run deep and wild. What I will say is one of the myths that I see perpetuated over and over and over again is the connection between the moon and the body. And I see this when people talk about energy tracking and menstrual cycles and hormones and whatnot. And there's actually the scientific research does not support that as truth. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because we pride ourselves on being clear about what is metaphysics, what is something somebody's just saying? What is the history? So much of what we hear is, well, this is ancient and sacred. And it doesn't have to be ancient and sacred to be good and useful. There is so much about metaphysics, like tarot, that is not ancient, but we can make it sacred and we can make it beautiful. Working with the moon can be sacred. It doesn't mean that the way we work with it is ancient either. And we just want to be clear about that. We don't want to put a bunch of noise out into the world. That's not true. We want you to know what you're doing, where it's coming from, and be informed in a world where everything is confusing and you don't know who to trust and there's so much noise. Critical thinking is more important than ever. So I will tell you, the science does not support, based on different research, the moon's impact on your body in such a way that it impacts your emotional self, right? The science just doesn't support it. Now, that said, as a person who fully believes in metaphysics and astrology and everything, I do think that you have patterns to your energy, and those patterns can be tracked alongside of lunar phases and alongside the moon moving through the zodiac. Because when the moon moves through the zodiac in a pattern, that pattern shifts as we move through the seasons. And who you are is likely greatly impacted by the amount of sunlight you're receiving, the amount of fresh air you're receiving. And that has a great impact on your energy. So when the moon goes into the new moon in Aries, for example, that's always springtime. So when the new moon is in Aries, and then, oh gosh, I'm testing my astrology skills here. What's the opposite sign of Aries? Is it Libra? I'm on the fly answering this question. Did I get it right? Someone tell me. I am not the team astrologer. Anyway, every sign has an opposite. So if you, and the full moon is in theory, this does change too, but in theory, in the opposite sign of the new moon. So if you know that at the full moon in Libra, you always get like a little tense or you love that energy, and the new moon is in Aries, that could make sense because maybe you love the spring, and that always happens in the spring season. So this is where we can start to layer astrology knowledge and moon knowledge, is looking at the phases and then the zodiac together and then examining your energetic patterns. But it's not just the moon that's impacting that. It is also the zodiac moves, the moon moves through the zodiac in a reliable pattern based on the seasons of the earth also, right? So, or rather, I guess the moon, the seasons are happening in alignment with what's happening in the sky because the way the earth's rotating. I don't know. Now it's becoming too much for my brain to process, but it all happens very predictably, which is why working with the moon can be such a helpful and sacred tool, because it helps you to understand your patterns, your patterns. Now, the one piece of research that does tell us that we might be impacted by the moon. You'll hear a lot about the full moon and what it does to people, that it like brings out the worst, or like if you're a teacher, you might hear anecdotally that school is wild on a full moon, or if you're a nurse in a hospital or a doctor in a hospital, and you'll hear the ER is just hopping at a full moon. Well, there is research and studies that tell us that has more to do with our circadian rhythm, because when the moon is full, particularly during a super moon or a time of the year when the full moon rises and we see it like right away in the night sky, it is adding light to our sky for 3 to 4 days in a big way that we don't have the rest of the lunar cycle. So that's impacting our sleeping patterns and our circadian rhythm. And this has happened for all of time of people, which means that these experiences, they become part of our brains and our genetics and how we operate. So there is science around that. I do love to check the research, like what's fact and what are people just saying. And that is one of the things that is factual. Plus, the full moon does impact our tides. So if you're a person who lives near an ocean in particular, like as I do, you also your landscape is impacted by the moon phases as well. All right, so there's some fact for you, some science, how the moon phases work. But the rhythm of the moon can help us in so many ways. I don't super love, this is really popular right now in, like I said, any like divine feminine sort of conversation around a menstrual cycle, a hormonal cycle, and working with the moon together. I don't love to bring those two pieces into the same conversation because so many women in our society don't experience a menstrual cycle that lines up with the dates of a moon cycle. I'm a perfect example of that. I have endometriosis and adenomyosis, and my menstrual cycle is significant. It's like a week shorter than a lunar cycle. So for me, I don't like, there's some every other lunar cycle I am having my period is lasting like for 2 weeks basically in one lunar cycle, because it'll be at the beginning and then the end. And then the next lunar cycle, it's only once. And then the next one, it's two again. And so when I look this conversation around aligning a cycle to the moon cycle or your hormones or how you should feel at a certain point in time, I don't think is a helpful or relevant conversation for at least half the people hearing it. And can really invite us to use our precious time and energy chasing something that's challenging at best to make happen. Like if you're trying to adjust your menstrual cycle to match something about a moon cycle, I mean, that is an uphill battle. And is it really something that is going to bring enough to your life to utilize your time in that way? For me, the answer is no. For you, maybe the answer is different. For me, that answer is no. So I look at the moon phases. How do I actually use them? I use a lunar tracker in my planner. We have a planner here at the Sisters Enchanted that we make and put out every year. And I track just like a little note about how I was feeling, a highlight of the day, emotions. I do mark down my menstrual cycle. Um, and I just kind of note like what was going on. And I look for patterns. I mean, I don't spend a ton of time doing this, but I do look and see, all right, well, in the winter season, were we more was there more unrest in the family, or did we do more things? Did we get out more? Did I feel better in my body? Did I have higher energy? Where was that? And it really just helps to understand what's going on, to find those patterns of energy, particularly when you live with other people who are all different from you, and you can see where you connect and where you disconnect during different energetic cycles. The phases of the moon, they also mirror the phases of our seasons, which can also mirror the phases of your individual day. So, working with the moon can help us to develop a rhythm in our life that doesn't naturally exist anymore. It used to. It doesn't naturally exist in the world that we live in, because the world that we live in asks us to get up, either go to work or do something right away, like someone to care for, some responsibility, come home, do more responsibilities, veg out on social media or TV for 3 hours, go to bed, probably drink too many glasses of wine, have a bag of chips you didn't want to eat, did not move forward on how you want to feel in your life on this day. And the rhythm of the moon can remind us to put those ebbs and flows into our daily life. When we're looking at the month ahead, where are the ebbs? Where are the moving forward and then the pulling back, the moving forward, the pulling back, the seasonal year, the same thing. They all follow this rhythm. And the moon reminds us of the rhythm. And it builds in these checkpoints for us to check in with ourselves and see where we are feeling, where we're acting, where we're reflecting, where we're receiving. And the moon teaches us these lessons that we have disconnected from in our modern world. So I love working with the moon. I love having it as part of my daily rhythm, my daily checkpoint. It's something that's accessible and easy to talk about with all ages of people. So even like my aging grandparents, to talk about where the moon is and why it looks the way it does and how wonderful it is. And then with my kids, I can talk to them about the moon phases, and then with them I talk about the astrology and the energetics. And it's just it's a beautiful reminder. It's easily accessible. You don't have to pay anything for it because it's all the way up there in the sky every day. We just look to it. And then understanding, applying the astrology part, that's like next level. But and then knowing what the 8 phases of the moon cycle stand for also. That's another part of the layer that you can add in there. The part that is most easy to remember is with the new moon, when the sky is dark and you can't see the moon. This is when we decide how we want to feel. How do we want to feel? That's what we decide there. It's inward energy. How do we want to feel? And then with the full moon, when the sky is the brightest at the opposite of the new moon, 2 weeks later, This is where we do our shadow work and we say, well, what do I need to release in order to feel the way I want to feel? What do I need to let go of so that I can receive more that aligns with the way I want to feel? And those are the basics of metaphysics and working with the moon in a daily sacred practice or a lunar cycle practice. It doesn't have to get harder than that. And it's not hard. It is just the layers can feel overwhelming for some folks who really want to get it right. We do teach all about this in holistic witchery. There's a whole unit on it. And we bring in that practical element too of using the moon phases to live a practical life that feels in alignment with your desires and where you want to be. So you can check that out. Get on the info list if you're interested in hearing more about holistic witchery. But your takeaways from today, look to the moon for that guidance and rhythm, and look to the moon for the reminders of pushing forward and pulling back, pushing forward and pulling back, and make sure that you build that rhythm into your life. Because if we skip the steps, we pull back too much, then we don't take action. If we take action all the time, we're never pulling back. We have to wax and we have to wane, just like the moon. All right. Well, I hope you found this topic interesting. I know I love talking about the moon. We have Holistic Witchery registration coming up very, very soon. And we also have a free class, a spring equinox sacred reset that is happening beginning March 18th, I believe. So you can check out all the details for that too and snag your spot over there. All right, y'all, go look for the moon. Take a peek at it. Until next time, I hope that you have an enchanted rest of your day ahead. If you love the podcast, be sure to leave us a rating or a review. That helps us to get the word out about all we're doing here at the Sisters Enchanted. Thanks for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next episode.